In this presentation, we'll talk about the process of downloading transactions from the bank that we can then use to import into QuickBooks Online. When might we want to use this? Possibly if we were doing a connection to QuickBooks Online, but we couldn't get all the data that we needed, or if we want to completely define the date range in which we're going to have the input that we want to put into our system, or possibly if we want to make some adjustments to that data before we input it into the system. So for example, if you log into QuickBooks Online, you do a bank feed connection, and you see that you're limited to the amount of transactions you need to put into the system, and you need a whole year's worth of transactions. Well, at that point, you might say, well, I'll go to the bank website then, possibly, and then download all the transactions, see if I could do that in that format and upload it. Or alternatively, you may have a full year's worth of data and you want to take that data and manipulate it somewhat within possibly like Excel or something like that before you import it, making it a bit easier to then work with once it gets into the QuickBooks system. So let's imagine a story here. Let's imagine our story. We set up QuickBooks Online. We need a full year's worth of data. I got to do tax preparation and whatnot, and whatever bookkeeping sources we have so far is a mess, if any, and therefore I want to just enter the whole year's worth of data from the bank statement into QuickBooks and do it as easy as possible and allow the system hopefully to help me to generate the financial statements from that point. I couldn't do it from the connection because the bank won't let me have a full year's of data transferred from the bank to QuickBooks Online. Therefore, I'm going to go to my bank and see if I can download the file in some kind of way for a full year's worth of data that I can then import into the QuickBooks system. So you would go to your institution, for example, Wells Fargo, and you'd be looking online, you'd be looking for something that would allow you to download the information. At Wells Fargo, they have the accounts here, manage the accounts, we have the download account activity. If you cannot find this, then you can ask the bank. Most banks will have some formats to download. Again, most banks, if you're finding a connection with the bank in QuickBooks Online, then that means they have some kind of agreement with QuickBooks Online, and typically will then have downloadable data that will be in some format that will be in compatibility with QuickBooks Online, which includes the QBO or QuickBooks Online type of format and or a CVS type file. So then we would go over here and we'd say, all right, I need a full year's worth of data. If you have a nice institution like Wells Fargo, actually it lets us have the date ranges. They're not restricting us to say, hey, you have to do a month at a time, or you can only have a complete month. They're allowing us to have, I could select data in the middle of the month if I wanted to and go for the full range. But I'm going to say I need the whole year's worth of data because I need to do my taxes like now. And so I'm going to go from January 1st, 2019 to 12/31/2019. And then we have the formats that we can download it in. So Quicken is another QuickBooks product. Don't get those two confused. They're not the same. So if you have Quicken, you have a Quicken type of format that you can download. QuickBooks, this is what we're looking for. And this would be just in the QuickBooks download file. Now, you won't be able to open it if you see this file. You won't be able to look at it like in an Excel format or manipulate any of the data. However, if you download that information and then upload it into QuickBooks, it should be the most, easiest way. I mean, you shouldn't have any kind of matching problems or any problems like that, considering the fact it should be in the QuickBooks formatting file. So this is the one you're looking for if you're just saying, hey, I just want the 12 months of data. I don't want to manipulate it or anything. I just want to, get 12 months into my system without having any kind of problems happening. This one's the least likely to have any problems happening, right? And then we have the common item down here, which basically in a spreadsheet format, that's usually a CSV file. And so, which is kind of like an Excel file that you can open basically with an Excel program. And that's a useful tool. That's a useful way. And pretty much most large institutions will have this type of file with QuickBooks Online if they have an agreement with QuickBooks, and that'll be great. If they don't have that type of system, possibly they don't have that integration or the downloadable capacity for that file of form or that form file type, then they almost always will typically or generally will have a CVS type file, which is basically a spreadsheet type file, and be able to download that, which you can then use. Now, even if they have these two options, you may still want to use this spreadsheet file if you want to manipulate the data a bit before you enter it into QuickBooks Online. You can clean it up a little bit, and we might talk more about how you might want to do that later, but just keep that in mind as well. If you were to download these, the QBO file would look like this. And so let's make this a little larger. Let's make it really large. It should extra large. All right, it's gonna be a QuickBooks file. It's got the extension of a QBO file, and then we have the other format, and you can see the extension here. It looks like an Excel file. We can open it basically in Excel, but it's a CSV file. So a CSV file will be in this format. If you were to open the CSV file, it would look something like this. And you got the dates. I X'd out the amounts, and then you've got numbers, including like check numbers. And then you've got the name or description information. So that's basically it. That's what QuickBooks is taking the information and putting it into your system. They're taking this information and basically putting it into the QuickBooks system. And then you're going to have to go into QuickBooks and match some of these things up and say what the transaction is basically doing. Is it a deposit? Who is it coming? Is there a customer? Is there a vendor? Who's the vendor? What's the account it should be going to? If it's a deposit, is it an income account? If it's an expense, who's the vendor that we're going to have the expense for, and what will be the related expense account. So just note while you're in here too, you also note that the descriptions, you don't see just like one vendor, like American Express. I don't see just American Express. I see this whole list of things. This is actually what's going to be processed through like all the bank fee transaction. You don't just see the vendor, which could be useful if you have different transactions that are kind of repetitive for like the same vendor, and you may be able to go through there and kind of adjust the information to be applicable for different transactions for the same vendor and let QuickBooks kind of memorize those transactions. Or alternatively, you may go through this and say, hey, look, I would like this just to show the vendor names like American Express or something, or Amazon.com. Notice Amazon's got different extensions here. So if these are income, if this is income here, I might be able to say, hey, take this different extension from Amazon and then apply it to a different income account. I might be able to allow QuickBooks to do that. Or I could say, hey, I just want it all to be from Amazon. I don't want all this other stuff. I want you to just see Amazon, and you could clean it up in here. You could delete all the other information and just make these all from Amazon and so on and so forth. You can clean it in that way, and that'll make it easier for when you put it into QuickBooks Online to apply the vendor, because the vendor will just be whatever the description is. So here's the description. You'll have the same vendor typically, and then you just need to assign the expense account for that particular vendor. The place where you will have problems is where you have one vendor that you're assigning to two expense accounts. Like you have the same vendor, but you buy different things there that might go into different expense account categories, or you have two different people or deposits that go into two different type of income accounts that you want to break out in some way. When in those types of situations, if you can find a way to differentiate between all this information in the vendor section, like these items, if you could find a way to differentiate the vendor that's always coming through on the bank statement with this more detailed information, then you can have two vendors that are slightly distinct, possibly, right? And then you can tie them out to two distinct income accounts or expense accounts. And that will make things a little bit easier, so you don't have to switch the expense account every time. So we might talk about that a little bit more, some of those kind of options a little bit more. But just note that this added detail that you'll see in here from the bank can be something that is useful, or it might be just added information that you don't want. What you really want is the vendor name or the customer name.